Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel Echo of Life. Let's start. There comes a point when every person looks into the mirror and understands that the reflection staring back isn't quite who they imagined they would become. It's not necessarily failure that lingers, but a quiet awareness that something essential has drifted out of alignment. A subtle rift between who you are and who you might still be. That moment, tinged with both clarity and unease, is where genuine self-transformation truly begins. Because before any outward change can manifest, it must first unfold as a quiet, internal revolution. We often envision change as an event, a decisive moment, a sudden breakthrough, a dramatic turning point. In reality, transformation is a gradual process of dismantling and rebuilding the mind. It's not merely about adopting new behaviors. It's about learning to see the world through an entirely different lens. And this kind of deep, internal shift does not occur overnight. It unfolds gradually, often through periods of struggle, self-doubt, and intense self-reflection, experiences most people instinctively avoid. Psychology has long explored this process. Carl Jung described it as individuation, the integration of a person's fragmented parts into a unified whole. Abraham Maslow framed it as the path towards self-actualization, the unfolding of one's fullest potential once foundational needs are met. Yet beyond theories and terminology lies a simple truth. Transformation begins when the discomfort of remaining the same finally outweighs the fear of stepping into the unknown. Many never consciously reach this threshold. They move through life repeating familiar patterns, running the same emotional programs instilled in childhood. Their choices are guided by invisible scripts, beliefs shaped by family, culture, and early experiences. These beliefs form psychological walls that quietly dictate what they deem possible. I am not enough. People like me don't succeed. It's too late to start over. They may sound harmless, but they become the invisible architecture of a life. The psychology of transformation activates the moment we begin to question these walls. Not to tear them down immediately, simply to notice them. Awareness, as straightforward as it seems, is the first act of rebellion against a conditioned mind. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer be wholly governed by it. Research into neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, reveals something remarkable. Each time you consciously challenge an old belief or behavior, your brain physically begins to alter its wiring. New neural connections form. Old pathways weaken. The brain is not a fixed map, but a living, adaptable landscape shaped by your experiences and thoughts. In scientific terms, transformation is an act of neurobiological construction. You are literally reshaping your own mind when you choose, think, and act differently. Yet here lies a paradox. Most people desire transformation without discomfort. They want the reward of change without the friction that makes it possible. Psychologically speaking, however, discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's a signal that your brain is being pushed beyond its predictable pathways. It is the old self losing its grip. The ego resists because its primary function is to maintain stability. That's why growth often feels chaotic. Your inner system clings to familiarity, even when that familiarity is precisely what limits you. If you've ever tried to change a habit, waking earlier, eating better, thinking more positively, you've likely encountered this resistance. It isn't merely laziness. It's your brain protecting its established identity. Cognitive scientists refer to this as homeostasis, the psychological mechanism that preserves a consistent sense of self. When you act in ways that don't align with who you believe you are, your mind experiences unease and seeks to restore the old equilibrium. This is why lasting transformation does not begin with new habits. It begins with a new self-concept. Your identity must shift before new behaviors can sustain themselves. Consider this. If you see yourself as perpetually disorganized, you might tidy your space once or twice, but your brain will find a way back to chaos. If you believe you're bad with money, you might budget briefly, then unconsciously sabotage your progress. But when you start to affirm, I am someone who values order, or I am learning to manage my resources wisely, the mind begins to align with this new image. Once identity shifts, new actions start to feel natural rather than forced. Transformation, then, is an identity project disguised as self-improvement. Every meaningful change, from breaking addictions to healing relationships, starts with redefining who you believe yourself to be. This is why practices like therapy, journaling, and introspection are effective. They make the unconscious visible. They help you observe the hidden beliefs shaping your life. And once something hidden is brought into the light, it loses much of its power. But the process is rarely linear. In fact, most who undergo deep change describe it as a cycle: progress, doubt, regression, clarity, and renewal. It mirrors the archetypal hero's journey, where one must leave the comfort of the familiar, face inner trials, and return transformed. Psychology confirms this pattern. Transformation often includes a liminal phase, the uncertain, uncomfortable space between who you were and who you are becoming. It is a necessary threshold. Without it, there can be no rebirth. Intriguingly, the brain mirrors this cycle. When you enter a liminal phase, whether by leaving a job, ending a relationship, or confronting old wounds, your brain's default mode network becomes more active. This region is associated with self-reflection and narrative identity. It is your mind's way of rewriting your personal story. Every new story you tell about yourself, if repeated and emotionally felt, begins to embed itself neurologically as your new truth. So when people say you become what you believe, they are not speaking metaphorically. They are describing a measurable psychological process. A belief is not just a thought. It is a pattern of neural firing repeated until it feels true. The only way to change it is through conscious repetition, emotional reinforcement, and new experiences that prove to the brain the old pattern no longer defines reality. Here, however, is where many transformation journeys falter. People often attempt to change through sheer willpower, forcing new behaviors while clinging to old identities. They declare, "I want to be confident," yet internally still see themselves as insecure. They try to act strong while believing they are weak. The subconscious doesn't accept the performance. It knows the original script too well. That's why transformation requires truth before effort. You cannot become someone new while lying to yourself about who you currently are. Radical honesty forms the foundation of lasting change. Not the kind that shames, but the kind that gently exposes the true state of your inner world. This is what I feel. This is what I've avoided. This is what still hurts. Such self-honesty dismantles the psychological defenses that keep you trapped. It is akin to cleansing a wound. Painful initially, but essential for healing. When you reach this level of honesty, something shifts. You stop trying to change from a place of self-rejection and begin evolving from a place of self-understanding. This is a crucial distinction. Much self-improvement advice fails because it operates on the assumption that you need to fix yourself. But psychological transformation isn't about fixing. It's about integration, accepting the parts you've disowned and learning to work with them rather than against them. For instance, take procrastination. On the surface, it may seem like a simple lack of discipline. Underneath, however, it often masks fear, fear of failure, fear of success, or fear of judgment. When that fear is met with compassion instead of shame, the behavior begins to dissolve because the mind no longer needs to protect itself through avoidance. In this sense, transformation is not an act of self-attack, but of self-reconciliation. This is also why emotional awareness is a cornerstone of lasting change. You cannot transform what you refuse to feel. Emotions are signals, data from the subconscious about what is misaligned or unhealed. Anger might indicate crossed boundaries. Sadness might point to loss or unmet needs. Anxiety might reveal the tension between the old self and the emerging one. When you learn to interpret these emotions instead of suppressing them, you begin to move through them rather than remain trapped by them. Recent psychological studies show that mindfulness and self-compassion accelerate transformation by reducing the brain's threat response. When you approach your own discomfort with curiosity instead of judgment, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, calms down. This opens access to the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reasoning, decision-making, and long-term growth. Simply put, kindness toward yourself literally expands your capacity to change. The most profound transformations occur quietly, not in grand declarations, but in subtle moments when you catch yourself choosing differently. You pause before reacting. You breathe before speaking. You say no when you once would have said yes out of fear. Each of these moments is a psychological micro-revolution. They rewire the self. And when enough accumulate, the old identity simply fades, replaced by something truer, freer, and more aligned with who you are meant to become. Yet we rarely notice transformation as it happens. It's only in retrospect that you realize how far you've come. The conversations you no longer tolerate, the thoughts that no longer dominate you, the pain that no longer defines you, these are all markers of change. The person you are now would be unrecognizable to your past self. That is the quiet miracle of self-transformation. Not a single moment of awakening, but the gradual realization that you have outgrown an old version of yourself without needing to destroy it. And still, there is always more to uncover. Transformation does not end. It evolves. Each time you expand into a new layer of identity, life presents another threshold, another aspect of the self waiting to be integrated. Growth does not demand perfection, only participation. The mind resists, the heart wavers, but something within you keeps moving forward, drawn by the faint, undeniable pull of becoming. What many misunderstand about transformation is that it isn't solely about discipline or motivation. It is about awareness, an awareness so honest that it begins to dissolve illusion. When you see clearly, when you perceive the real mechanics of your mind, the fears, the narratives, the defenses, you gain freedom. Not a freedom that makes everything easy, but one that allows you to choose consciously, even when it's difficult. There is a psychological phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance, the discomfort felt when your actions and beliefs don't align. Most resolve this by reverting their actions to match old beliefs. Those who truly transform do the opposite. They allow the discomfort to linger long enough for it to force their beliefs to evolve. They endure that in-between phase where nothing feels certain, where you're too aware to go back but not yet confident enough to move forward. This is where the real work happens. This is where transformation hardens into identity. In this light, self-transformation is not a single event, but a constant negotiation between who you were and who you are becoming. Each day offers a subtle invitation to respond, think, and perceive differently. Sometimes you falter. Sometimes you revert to old habits. Yet you never start from zero because awareness does not unlearn itself. Once you've seen a truth, it lingers. It whispers in the background of your choices until you listen again. One of the most overlooked aspects of transformation is environment. We like to imagine willpower can override everything. In reality, our surroundings, the people we engage with, the content we consume, the spaces we inhabit, all reinforce who we believe ourselves to be. Psychologically, your environment mirrors your identity. If you seek to become more creative but spend time in cynical circles, your brain receives conflicting signals. The external world constantly echoes the old self you are trying to leave behind. This is why psychologists studying behavioral change emphasize environmental design. If you wish to transform, you must build a world that supports the person you are becoming. Remove triggers of the past self. Add visual cues for the new one. Surround yourself with people who see your potential, not just your history. Every sensory input, every conversation, every space subtly shapes your neural wiring. You cannot plant new seeds in toxic soil and expect them to thrive. But the deeper layer of transformation isn't about the outer world at all. It's about what you allow yourself to believe internally. Beliefs are not just thoughts. They are instructions your brain gives your body. When you believe you cannot change, your nervous system prepares for failure before you even begin. When you believe you are capable, your physiology shifts, heart rate, posture, focus all begin to align with that inner certainty. This is the biology of expectation. The brain responds to what it believes to be true. This is why visualization and affirmation, when done with emotional conviction, have measurable effects. Neuroscientists find that imagining yourself performing an action activates nearly the same brain regions as physically doing it. The more vividly you rehearse a new identity, the more familiar it becomes to your brain. The less resistance you feel when acting on it in reality. You become, quite literally, what you practice being. Still, transformation isn't about pretending. It's about embodying. Pretending says, I am something I'm not. Embodying says, I am learning to live as what I already am beneath the noise. Deep down, the human psyche doesn't crave to become someone new. It yearns to return to the version of itself that was always whole but forgotten. That is the paradox of self-transformation. It feels like becoming someone different, but in truth, it is the process of remembering who you really are when fear and conditioning no longer dictate your choices. Many philosophical traditions describe this through the concept of the false self, the persona constructed to survive in the world. As children, we adapt. We learn what earns love and avoids rejection. We craft a mask that fits our surroundings. Eventually, that mask becomes suffocating. It limits expression, truth, and freedom. The journey of transformation begins when you stop identifying with that mask. You start asking, who am I beneath what I was taught to be? That question alone can dismantle decades of psychological conditioning. In therapeutic contexts, this is sometimes called ego death, not in a dramatic sense, but as the gradual loosening of identification with the constructed self. You cease defending opinions so fiercely. You stop needing to be right. You stop trying to prove your worth. You begin to observe your thoughts instead of becoming them. From this perspective, transformation starts to feel less like effort and more like an unfolding. The more you release, the more space you create for something authentic to emerge. Yet even authenticity is not a fixed state. It is fluid, adaptive. Who you are today is not who you were 5 years ago. That isn't a contradiction, it's evolution. The psychology of self-transformation acknowledges that identity itself is dynamic. Every belief, experience, and emotional breakthrough rewrites a piece of your internal story. Rather than chasing a final version of yourself, transformation invites you to live in alignment with your current truth, knowing it will continue to change as you do. Still, transformation requires courage. Not the cinematic kind, but the quiet, consistent courage that shows up even when no one is watching. Changing yourself means disappointing past versions of you and sometimes disappointing people who still identify with those versions. You may face misunderstanding. You may lose certain connections. You might even question your own sanity at times. This is normal. Growth often looks like loss before it looks like liberation. But what you lose in comfort, you gain in clarity. There is also a psychological principle rarely mentioned: the law of emotional conservation. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They transform into patterns, projections, or physical tension. When you decide to transform, these stored emotions rise to the surface. That's why the process can feel turbulent. It isn't that you are breaking. It's that your mind is releasing what it has long held onto. Tears, confusion, fatigue. These are not signs of weakness. They are signals that old emotional backlog is being processed. Each release creates space for renewal. With each release, your relationship with time changes. The future ceases to feel like a distant destination you are chasing. It begins to feel like something unfolding naturally from the choices you make in the present. This is a major psychological shift from striving to allowing. Because once you stop trying so hard to become someone, you start being someone. You act from alignment rather than desperation. Ironically, this is often when change accelerates. The moment you cease chasing transformation is often the moment you embody it. It's important to recognize that transformation isn't always visible to others. Sometimes it looks like stillness, silence, even withdrawal. You may spend months reflecting, reading, journaling, or simply observing. To the outside world, it might appear you are stuck. But internally, your neural pathways are reorganizing. Your subconscious beliefs are being rewritten. The deepest revolutions often happen quietly in the background of daily life. When the new self finally stabilizes, it feels familiar in a strange way. You don't feel like you've become someone new. You feel like you've come home. Inner conflict softens. Old triggers lose their power. You respond with calm instead of defensiveness. You speak honestly without rehearsal. You move through the world with a groundedness that doesn't depend on outcomes. This is psychological maturity, not the absence of pain, but the presence of perspective. From a neuroscientific view, this stage corresponds to increased coherence between the brain's emotional and rational centers, the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. It is the integration of emotion and reason, instinct and awareness. Your reactions become choices. Your impulses become insights. You cease being driven by unconscious patterns and begin living with conscious intent. This is what psychologists refer to as self-regulation and inner alignment. Yet even here, transformation continues because the self is not a destination. It is a process of continuous adaptation. You will keep evolving as new challenges arise and new layers of awareness open. Transformation is not a ladder but a spiral. You revisit the same lessons at higher levels of consciousness, each time meeting them with more wisdom, patience, and less fear. The psychologist Viktor Frankl captured this beautifully. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That is the essence of transformation, realizing that external control is limited, but internal evolution is infinite. You may not control what happens to you, but you can always shape what it means to you. And that shift in meaning is what gives pain its purpose. So if you find yourself standing at a threshold, uncertain, afraid, unsure who you are becoming, know that it is part of the process. Confusion is not failure. It is the space between identities. It means the old structure is dissolving and something new is taking shape. You don't need to have everything figured out. You simply need to stay awake through the transition. Awareness is the bridge between what was and what will be. Eventually, there comes a point where transformation is no longer something you do. It becomes the way you live. You stop needing drastic change because your life itself becomes a state of continuous renewal. You outgrow without forcing. You learn without trying. You heal without rushing. And in those quiet moments, you begin to understand that transformation was never about becoming extraordinary. It was about realizing that being ordinary yet fully conscious is extraordinary enough. The psychology of self-transformation, then, is not about chasing perfection. It's about cultivating awareness, compassion, and truth. It's about aligning your internal world so deeply that your external world begins to reflect it naturally. It's about learning to walk through the unknown without needing guarantees. Because life, in its essence, is a series of transformations. From innocence to experience, from fear to understanding, from self-protection to self-expression. And if you look closely, you'll see that every ending you've survived wasn't truly an ending at all. It was an initiation. Every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of despair was life's way of shaping you into someone capable of greater depth. The person you are becoming is not the result of luck or fleeting motivation. It is the result of every choice you've made to face yourself honestly when it would have been easier to hide. That is what transformation truly is. Not a single breakthrough, but a lifelong conversation between the person you've been and the person you're still becoming. It's not glamorous. It's not easy, but it is real. And in the end, that's what matters, to live a life so true, so aware, so awake that you can say, I didn't just exist, I evolved. Thank you watching my videos. Please subscribe my channel for more update.